Hi, this is Jeff from the INTJ equation, and today I'm joined by Lauren. She is a therapist, an INTJ therapist, a female INTJ therapist at that in
Mhm.
Malaysia. Would you like to introduce yourself to the folks?
Sure. I'm an intern therapist on her way to completing a master's degree in professional counseling. So I'm in year two, and initially I was supposed to complete everything by last November, but thanks to COVID, here I am still struggling with one last module, which is my internship, to get client hours in order to graduate and get licensed to practice.
Very cool. Very cool. I think INTJ therapists there. I've seen a few. They're out there. It's just it might be a. Do you struggle with that at all? Like just not having really FE and stuff like that. You have a trouble connecting to your patients.
Surrounded by feelers in this field does make it a little bit unusual. Um, but I guess what overrules all of it is the NI curiosity
Hmm.
and the TE desire to just want to organize everything around you. And in mental health, there's a lot of chaos. So it's
Totally.
actually kind of fun and fulfilling to organize all of that. And FI ideals, wanting to get people into a place where they are self-aware, feel better about themselves, and to just make the world go around a little more smoothly, if you get what I mean. So I guess that's how I can tie my top three functions to what I do.
Yeah, for sure. I was talking to you before the we started recording there. I was a case manager in behavioral health, and just I don't know how
Mhm.
it is in Malaysia with just the bureaucracy and just dealing with all the politics by mostly ESTJ politics made it very hard.
SI heavy and like sometimes unhealthy TE, I find.
Oh yeah.
Plenty of FE as well. You don't want to step on anyone's toes. So that those kind of roadblocks, which INTJs would find frustrating, I imagine.
Yeah, just like definitely the SI, like we're gonna keep doing the same thing over and over because it worked in the past. We're not gonna be innovative and then trying to think of something that works for now or the future if we're just gonna keep doing the same
Yep.
thing over and over again.
Yes.
It's not helpful to anybody except the
No,
ESTJs who
and
are comfortable.
yeah, and not moving on with the times really. I guess that would be the difference between SENI axis and SINE axis.
Yeah, I think the like a SI thing is just really tied on to the past. SE is more like the present moment and just kind of going with the flow. I mean, I could relate to that because
Yeah.
I'm an SE user, but
Yep.
just the SI is just something that we don't particularly care for, I guess.
Yeah, not valued by us, yes.
So, what's your experience of being a female INTJ? And it's pretty
Not
rough being
that
male.
easy. Growing up in a collectivistic society, for a start, and uh, the patriarchy dominating more than anything really here. So being outspoken as a girl in the classroom, that would kind of get you into trouble, and people would side eye you and such. Um, and it just be like um, you kind of be like a disruptive force in any room that you're in. But you just feel with the FI that no, I just have to say it, or else I can't live with myself, can't sit with myself if that doesn't come out into the open. So the friction that comes along with that in societies such as here has produced some stress over time, you know.
So, you say a collectivist society. Could you elaborate more on what that means exactly?
Yes, collectivistic society is about what the group would agree on, and as you can imagine, it would be very compatible with what FE stands for, not so much what FI stands for. Um, and it's about going with what the group wants, really. And as opposed to having your own opinions and stuff, and that being valid, you know?
Okay. All right. So, I mean, we're just kind of made to go against the grain. It's pretty rough being an INTJ and
Mm-hmm.
and uh America because it's just such an extroverted society, and it's kind of, I guess it's probably more like an SE feel to it. I guess it's just kind of like impulse, buy, that sort of thing.
Mm,
So it's more of like a collective group, like family, tight knit civilization, society there.
right.
Right.
Yeah, okay. How about SI for American society? Because you were just mentioning SE.
Yeah, I think the consumerism goes well. I think like the politicians and like the education and mental health is definitely like STJ driven, but like the
Mhm.
consumerism, the capitalistic side is definitely like an SE, like buy, kind of like spend,
Yeah,
indulge, that sort of thing. It's just about like who has the biggest toys before you die wins here. It's not like what you do or what you're about
right.
or your moral standings. It's kind of like what you have really, and it's kind of ridiculous, I think.
Mm, okay. I would say that that is actually catching on a little here. Um, if you have any generations younger than baby boomers, Gen X downwards, so Gen X, millennials like myself, Gen Z coming after us, there's a bit more of that coming in actually, like wanting to buy the best stuff and perpetuated by, say, Instagram and social media. It's kind of driving this SE force a little more into the community here. And therefore, it clashes with the SI heavy sense of tradition and having to adhere to tradition over here. So that's pretty interesting to observe.
Yeah, I think a lot of countries are just trying to become more Americanized, like definitely like South Korea. They get surgeries to look more like us. That's something that we're talking about on our Discord server, like try to change like their shape of their eyes and their nose and their face. It's a weird phenomenon.
Mhm.
What is your
Mm,
impression of
yes.
America over there?
Impression. Heavily influenced by it, whereby the family I actually grew up with, we are a little bit unorthodox, even by Malaysian standards. So I grew up on Western media, like watching Saturday morning cartoons, British television as well. Compared to my peers who would grow up watching like locally produced media or Asian kind of media, whereas my family were more tuned into, let's say, who won the Oscars each year and like following the Academy Awards. And I used to work in animation as well. So I would look to Western media quite a bit as inspiration for what I did back then. Um, yeah, so it
Let's
is an
talk.
unusual case.
Yeah, for sure. It's just I don't know why our way of life spreading. I guess just we have the power and the money and the influence. I really considered. I talked to a Finnish lady. She's an INFJ. I did some videos and a podcast with her, and I really heavily considered moving to Finland at one point, but
Mm,
just didn't happen. I think they're really value like education and things like that. And like she's just talking about how introverts really fit in. Would you say you have an introverted society or is it an extroverted society?
right. Pressure to be extroverted, but there are more than plenty of introverts around me, I notice. They also face a similar friction, like to whether to conform or not, or just do what they naturally would want to do. So quite a number of my friends are introverts for that reason. We kind of bond and rant about the same kind of things that we struggle with,
What kind of
even if they're different MTI types.
that's what I was going to ask actually. What types do you kind of socialize with?
I
Like,
lost you at the question. I lost you
yeah,
at what kind of.
yeah. Let's give it a second. Okay, I think we're back. I'll have to edit the stuff out. I was asking what kind of types are your social circle in?
Mm, introverted and intuitive feelers mainly. So I'm surrounded by INFJs, INFPs, got a couple of ENFP pals as well. Uh, but if it comes to thinkers, I have a longtime INTJ friend who is an architect, also female, by the way, and an ISTP female, right, who I met in high school. So that's been a long-term friendship as well.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Right. So can you explain like how your NI works? Like, is it like a guiding light, kind of like a voice in your head? Is it like pictures? I think it's a little bit different for everybody, at least NI users.
Yeah, it is probably the most difficult function to define. And from my perspective, it seems to have a mind of its own, really. Uh, and it's tied to, I guess, uncovering meaning behind things, symbolism as well. Uh, I guess it's something that you would understand more if once you pair it with its axis partner, SE, because SE is how we see what is immediately around us, immediate surroundings. And on the other hand, NI is doing something with this data. Um, Really, I guess it applies in how I approach creative work, and to a degree, even with what I do in counseling. Yeah, and I working along with my FI while I see clients helps to produce this strong sense of empathy and let's see, continuity with a client, just to keep things consistent. Yeah, and if we take FI out and come back to NI, looking back at my life, it seems to tie into finding a common thread between things, a continuity, if you would call it that.
Mhm.
And yeah, I guess that's how I make sense of the SE data that is coming in through the five senses and whatnot.
Okay, and just growing up as an NI Dom, that was it like hard? Were people like trying to get you out of your head? Were you daydreaming a lot? Were you kind of like speculating future possibilities and people like try to ground you? Is that a pretty common thing?
It was, yeah. So I would be doodling in primary school, like the classroom, and people would try to like pull me out of it as if I were like swimming underwater, enjoying myself. But people are like trying to bring me out of that and tell me to focus on the lesson at hand. But I just thought that whatever was internal, NI, FI world was far more interesting. So that would be that.
Yeah. Like I was talking, I was it might struggle for us to empathize with people and kind of connect on an emotional level, but I think a lot of the families I worked with appreciated it. I didn't really work one-on-one as much as you would, of course, as a therapist, but I kind of organized the cases and found resources and other
Yeah.
organizations for them to work with. I think they really appreciated kind of like our outside of the box thinking and kind of ways that we can kind of help and different ideas and different perspective to look at things. How do you think like your patients would appreciate like an NI Dom or NITE user as a therapist?
Mm. An NITE therapist would naturally want to circle back to what this really is all about.
Mhm.
So, because we are so by default big picture thinkers, it's we are able to pick up, I am able to pick up when the client is like going off tangent or like escaping from the matter at hand kind of thing. So I would just gently try to bring them back to what really should be addressed and what is the matter at hand. So again, to have that sense of continuity, a common thread through everything instead of like breaking it into bits, which naturally I wouldn't like. So naturally, I would want to reel them back and guide them back to that sense of continuity.
Okay. Yeah, like I was speaking to you before, like I actually had at one point a therapist who she wasn't an INTJ, but she was Malaysian and she was an intern. So it's kind of a weird coincidence,
Yeah.
synchronicity or whatever you want to call it. But I have a current therapist who's Asian. I don't think she's Malaysian. She looks maybe Chinese or something. I'm not sure. I never asked her. And she's an
Mm-hmm.
INTJ. So it's very
Mm.
beneficial, I think, to get a INTJ's perspective, and she can kind of relate to a lot of things. I think she actually typed herself as an ENFJ of all the types. I don't know. That's why my
Oh.
biggest criticism of MBTI testing and just testing in general, I think it just kind of bogus. But it's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting perspective, and really cool that we kind of crossed paths.
Yeah. They seem to keep finding you, or you keep finding them.
Yeah, I just never really ran into too many INTJs in my life until I really started like diving deep into this sort of thing. Like I work with two INTJs where I'm currently working, and it's just interesting like to see them like when they're alone, and I just hear them complaining about how everybody's stupid and everything else is everybody's fault and it's not their fault. But
Right.
other people talking about how mean and how rude they are, and I just like, wow, this is like my life story right here. I'm just kind of sitting
Mhm.
back and observing.
Yeah, where we can't help but play into the stereotypes that have been reinforced on the internet, especially
Yeah, I
because
think
they get partially right. They're not always right, but yeah,
I think it really just depends on like how mature the INTJ is and just their upbringing.
exactly.
It's
Yes.
it's not an INTJ world, that's for sure, and we kind of become bitter just because we don't really have our place to fit in, I guess.
Yeah, there's a danger of cynicism, which is why I find being surrounded by high NE users is helpful, I find, to balance out my NI dynamic, really.
Yeah, I think it's great to really kind of like we see like a straight focus and they're kind of like scattered and we can kind of get ideas from them. So I don't have a
Yeah.
lot of any users in my life, but definitely do appreciate them when they come
Mm,
along.
right. Yeah.
Right. So let's talk a little about, like you said, that you did some animation. So that's kind of a way to exercise your SE. What kind of animation did you
Mhm.
do? And is there any other ways you kind of uh, developed your SE at all?
SE has been in my life since quite a young age because I was already doodling and enjoying that sensation of, let's say, a crayon on paper. Since age, let's say 4, that's when I remember producing my first very stereotypical kids drawing. Yeah. And my sister, an INFJ, she's also pretty much into that. So, but outside the realm of MBTI, I think that it comes from our mom's side. So I think that's a conversation for another day. If we come back to the question, SE, I have an interesting relationship with it, no doubt. Since it is inferior, it is, I can say it's simultaneously a comfortable place to be in and an uncomfortable place to be in, really. Where if I'm using my drawing skills or illustration skills, now that I think about it, it's really my NI that's doing the talking. The SE is just really subservient to it, if you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so to the point that I'm quite often actually not quite aware of SE in the way that a an ESFP or an ISFP would be aware of such a thing. The
Yeah.
NI is just kind of doing its work. It's very subtle and kind of almost undercover kind of work. Mysterious.
So is your artwork and your animations, is it quite abstract or is it pretty grounded in reality, would you say?
I tend to try push boundaries really. Um, and the degree I attained was for 3D animation.
Uh-huh.
However, I found that I had more of an affinity towards the pre-production process of animation, which would involve the ideation, designing your characters, brainstorming, designing what let's say, a house would look like, what a street would look like, the world building aspect of it. And I suppose where you can really see that my SE is low in the function stack is when it came to more technical work, like actual animating in the 3D software, or rigging a character where you have to like create its skeleton and make sure let's say the fingers are moving right, the elbow joint is pivoted correctly and stuff. That's an area that I struggled with
Really?
because it seems that it required tons of mental energy to be present there and see what's really there to manipulate or modify. So,
Yeah, it
so
seems
an
like
interesting relationship with SE.
Yeah, it seems like high NI users are more big picture oriented and less detailed oriented, so the details can be a little tedious for me personally too, as well.
Mhm.
I definitely have no artistic value whatsoever. I can't draw anything, so it's definitely something I appreciate, but something I can't do. How about any sports or athletics? Have you done anything like that in the past?
Not too much, but in an interesting manner, like if the moment really called for it or demanded performance, somehow my SE would come in and let's say I would play tennis pretty well. And that could have been my TE also reeling me in by saying, hey, you've got to win. It's a competition. There's a thrill in that. And you just gotta like beat the other person. So that's when in a quirky moment, my extroverted functions would kick in and kind of drive things momentarily.
Yeah, there's a theory of cognitive transition. I don't know if you are familiar with it. The theory for an INTJ, to be specific, is our SE. When you flip our
Mhm.
functions starting from SE down to NI, it's an ESFP. So when
Yeah.
we aspire with our inferior function, we become an ESFP for a short time, and we can become, you know, performance driven, performance based. We can definitely
Okay.
be a master of our SE, and I think that kind of brings us all out in all of us, and that's
Hmm.
something that kind of makes us happy, something that we really want to do and fulfills us.
I haven't heard of that theory before, or either that, or I didn't know there was a name to it. The closest I've come to that is looking at C.S. Joseph's videos.
Yeah,
Four sides of the mind, basically.
that's where I got it from, a lot of it, but he did get a lot of it from I haven't read it yet, but I definitely want to, the Aeons by Carl Jung.
All
He,
right.
he
Haven't
discusses
gotten
like,
into that either.
yeah, going to different sides of the mind and transitioning. He had like the anima and animus theory, but
Mm,
that's like kind of like different from the cognitive transitioning theory. Kind of that does make a lot of sense. Like I was just talking to an ENFJ who is writing books and opened a bookstore, and they're TI inferior, and that's a good way to exercise your
right.
TI, and that's really happy and it fulfills her. So it's great. Like Neil deGrasse
Okay.
Tyson, I'm sure you heard of Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's an ENFJ.
Mm,
He became a brilliant astrophysicist.
aha.
So just kind of like the ways that like our weakest point, one of our weakest points that we can become great at.
And it's called the aspirational function for a reason, I guess.
Yeah. All right. So we talked a little about Malaysia. How's like COVID and everything going along in Malaysia? Were you guys hit pretty hard or?
We've been hit pretty hard. I haven't gotten a vaccination appointment yet.
Wow.
It's quite uncertain on this side, really. Um, Seeing how we get through it, hopefully by the end of this year, the worst would be over. Yeah.
Really, like you being like a mental health professional, they're like one of the first ones priority to get the vaccination here in the States. That wasn't the case there, or are you just guys getting the vaccinations?
Doesn't seem to be the case here. The way they categorize who's a frontliner and who's not seems different here. It seems a bit unusual as well. Um, Perhaps that may have to do with the mental health stigma and how important mental health is viewed in that sense. Because if you're, say, a GP or a physician, you would be high up on the priority list. Some doctors here have gotten vaccinated already. Same with, let's say, some journalists in media, essential services like firefighting and policemen and such. But for us, especially me as an intern, still a student, doesn't seem to be a priority for my peers and myself for some reason. Anything could change really any day. So we'll just have to see.
So there's like a big mental health stigma there. I know we are talking a little bit about that in Japan before the camera started rolling. So even in Malaysia, even though you're a
Mhm.
therapist, is still kind of like frowned upon to get help for behavioral issues.
Yeah, so in that regard, we're still behind, whereby, let's say, if you're in my parents' generation, there would be a widespread belief that you just don't share this kind of stuff outside the family. Family is who you confide in for these kind of sensitive matters. Uh, yeah, and like maybe also because of how Asian culture views shame. let's see, our view of shame is nowhere near as extreme as, say, Japan or Korea, but there's still some of that here. So it's like if a rumor goes around that you are seeing a psychiatrist for a diagnosis, you might be viewed as the crazy one, the crazy neighbor who went to see a shrink, stuff like that. So we are behind in that regard, but slowly moving towards more progressive thinking and perspectives on mental health.
What areas will you say you're ahead of the curve at, like society wise, like any innovative things going on in Malaysia that we could be doing, you think?
Startup culture is catching on here. We certainly have the talent here to want to create new jobs, let's say, and new ways of thinking and new ways to do things. Let me see. I don't think there's anything that the US could learn from us at this moment, though. I mean, a highlight could be, and why I love living here is the food scene. This may tie a little bit with inferior SE, like food cravings and such, but
Yeah.
but the culinary scene here is ever expanding, and you can get almost any kind of cuisine all the way here, like Hungarian, let's say, Thai, Vietnamese, all kinds of European cuisine as well. So we are, in that sense, quite experimental and happy to fuse together different cuisines to try something new here. Because we love our food, pretty much.
That's interesting. I was talking to a Malaysian therapist I had some years ago, and she's like, I was talking to her about, possibly moving to another country, and I was talking about like, how I can appreciate Asian culture, excuse me, Asian culture or Eastern culture more than Western culture and American society. And I was talking about like, Malaysia, they eat rice like 3 times a day. That isn't the case in your experience?
Not so much. Nowadays, that's changed. Perhaps a couple of decades ago, 3 decades ago, that would be the staple. But in cafes locally, you could find pretty much any kind of dish. So we could eat anything 3 times a day, really, depending on
Yeah.
what we want.
So I know the US is a very SJ driven culture, like structure types and everything like that. Would you say it's pretty much the same in Malaysia? Like STJs, SFJs are pretty dominant there?
Yeah, pretty much so.
And you said like food cravings and stuff. Have you ever struggled with like SI overindulgence, like overeating or anything like that? I know that's something I've struggled with, just overeating. I can't control my eating. It's very difficult.
For some reason, I've been all right in that regard because, like, coming from a pretty health conscious family, like, exercise has also been the counterbalance towards enjoying our food in that sense. So I've never really struggled in that area because I always knew that, hey, somehow there's this rule where, all right, you want to eat that much, you got to exercise that much.
Yeah, I think my family, that wasn't the case. I think America, and like you said, it's starting to catch on there. Americans just like, there's a McDonald's on every corner. Go eat and go sit in front of your TV after you get off work and take that.
Consumerism, just acquire and acquire and acquire stuff. Is
Yeah,
that
just
right?
buy stuff and pay taxes and get fat and die. It's basically the mantra here, it seems like.
All right.
All right. So let's talk about your shadow side. Have you like really explored like the shadow side? I don't think MBTI really talks a whole lot about it. What kind of ways it comes and bites you in the butt?
I've touched the surface of this theory in terms of like how much I've read. But I mean, I would journal quite a lot throughout my life, which may be unusual for an INTJ. But I felt that in the environment I was raised in, honing that self-awareness was necessary so that I don't lose all my marbles, basically. To give a background, it's quite a strict upbringing that I've been a part of, where you had to like fall in line or else. And I think that might be the whole STJ combined with SFJ thing going on probably was extreme in the case of my upbringing. So honing my FI and SE, like lower down in the functions through journaling, was pretty important growing up. And if we tap into the shadow functions, so let's say my NE, TI, FE, and SI, I found TI to be quite a lifesaver at times. Yep. So I'm not sure if you've heard of a Personality Hacker, the podcast, led by Joel and Antonia. Let's see. All right. They had an episode, one of my favorite episodes, where they kind of tap on shadow work a little, and using your 6 function, number 6, which would be TI for us INTJs, would help us break out of an NIFI loop. And it would actually help to bring the TE back into the picture so that we can like spring into action, implement plans instead of staying in the rather too comfortable space of our own introverted minds. So that was really useful to help me break out of loops, which I guess would look to the outside world like depression symptoms, anxiety, and just not being comfortable with, let's say, not only myself, but with the outside world as well. So out of the shadow functions, TI seemed to be the best one to utilize.
Really? That's odd. Usually to get out of like the NIFI loop, you need something extroverted to kind of get you out of that. How does your TI, your critic, your cynics look? That's kind of like the John Beebe theory, the cognitive attitude theory. He discusses each cognitive function has its own cognitive attitude, which is based on the Jungian archetype. And our TIs and the cynics critic were very critical of our own thinking. Do you ever find yourself like you're not adequately smart enough to do something? How did you do? How did your TI get you out of that NIFI loop, the NIFI loop?
Yeah. And this is where it does get interesting because you have a point where I originally also saw it as using an extroverted function to break you out of something like a loop. But referencing the Personality Hacker podcast, TI in this sense was something I was actually more open to and more comfortable with because it was also introverted. So it didn't require me to take that big of a leap out into the E world, the extroverted world, to try and get better. And TI, importantly, is pretty detached. I would actually find that my TEFI axis was the one to bring me down. That's where the inner critic would come from. And for some reason, the TI was a lot more detached and flexible in that sense. And comparing TI with FI, TI is an excellent counterbalance, in my opinion, for the rigidity of FI. Because FI was telling me that you have to be this is the ideal, you have to be this person and perform this well, or else you're nothing. But in that regard, TI could say, well, all right, if you're not performing well, you just have to look at what steps to take and like see why it's not working well. And basically, TI didn't seem to be attached to my sense of identity. So there wouldn't be shame attached to TI. The shame was really where the FI was concentrated in introverted feeling and coloring my identity in a negative manner. But bringing in TI to kind of give it a slap in the face and say, hey, just because you've determined that it's not going to be that way forever, we can always make changes. And I suppose that's why I observe high TI users being pretty flexible, just able to change their opinion of something at the moment, or like making really, really, really quick changes instead of assumptions about how things are, like good or bad kind of thing.
I kind of had the opposite experience with TI users. Like, oddly enough, like I had my mentor for judo is an INTP, And he's just very like his SI is like very safety focused and very keeping it very traditional. And I think tradition is one thing that's killing judo here and just their absurd rules. I'm sure it's pretty big in Malaysia. Uh,
Okay.
but he just doesn't want to change his thought process. He'll say like judo, there's many ways to do the moves, but his way is the right way. It's always like with TI users, they're kind of arrogant that way with their TI. Like
All
this way
right.
is the right way. It's the correct way, you know.
That makes me wonder about possible looping for such an INTP, perhaps, because it sounds like the NE is not kicking in and having that openness towards stuff, to reframe stuff, tweak stuff, experiment.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get it and I work with them. We get along really well because we're, INTJ, INTPs are pretty compatible. And then like I'll show him like different ways and like he'll show me something and I'll learn something else, like using my TE to kind of develop my judo in my own game because it's very specific to like body build. Like he's like a
Right.
76-year-old man, very small and frail, and I'm kind of short and stocky built. So what works for me in judo is not going to work for him. And I just kind of find new ways and new combinations to kind of make it unique to me. And he kind of like, no, you got to do it this way. And like, I like to do it this way. I want to do it my way.
A pretty strong SI there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think he's really ESF. Like I was saying, like he's more like an INTP, supposed to be ESFJ focused, so about like caring for
Yeah.
people and things like that. And he's really like, if you get hurt, he's like all trying to like doctor you and stuff. It's kind of funny, but you never ask an INTP how they feel. That's a bad choice. Never ask an INTP how they feel.
All right. If maybe yeah, if he's in that ESFJ kind of frame of mind, it's like I have this picture of like an unhealthy ESFJ or ENFJ, really, the FENTI, really knowing that they think they know what is the best for those around them.
Yeah, I think it's a huge
With
SI
a lot
thing
of,
too.
yeah, the rigidity associated with that.
Yeah, SI could be pretty rigid, and we just don't really have a lack of SI. Speaking of SI,
Yeah.
do you just like have a don't like traditions? Do you like holidays? What are your takes on? I don't know how holidays work there in Malaysia or how important they are.
Mm. Apparently, we are the country with the highest number of public holidays per year.
Really?
So, and because we are a melting pot of multiple cultures, because let's say my family, we celebrate Chinese New Year and Christmas each year, the biggest things we celebrate.
Hmm.
Whereas it would be different for another family, like a Malaysian Indian family would be prioritizing Diwali or Deepavali as their number one celebration each year, whereas my family doesn't do that. But at the same time, my family gets to enjoy days off work on Diwali. So it's pretty nice having that going around. To tie back to the question, yeah, family gatherings don't do it for me. My preference would be having a maximum of say 4 to 5 people around the table. But if you bring a whole zoo of extended family over and covering small talk, going through that same old checklist, doesn't sit well with me. Pretty boring.
Yeah, before we run out of time, I definitely want to talk about like your theories on trauma because that's something I'm kind of like fleshing out in my own brain and something I definitely want to explore in the future. What are your experiences like or theories on trauma and everything?
Mm. Um, Thus far, they're not my own theories. It's more like I'm building on something that already exists and trying to form my own understanding of it. Um, I would center on the concept of loops and grips to start with. And growing up, I have struggled with depression a lot of the time. And looking back, that would be the NIFI loop that was taking place. Uh, so that would be too much of the introverted world, too much feeling, let's say. So I might have even looked like an ISFP, an unstable ISFP to the outside world. And to tie that to trauma, this may have happened because I was not allowed to be assertive at home. So that kind of pushed my TE all the way down, like even below FI in a very dysfunctional function stack. So it was as if, my stack was NI, FI, SETE or something weird like that. And that does not work. I would not recommend that. So I would be quite reclusive, keeping to myself, not confident, just no TE appearing to the outside world. And that's not a healthy place to be in. Like, unfortunately, it was not till I was in my early 20s that I got professional help, therapy and such. But somehow I managed, really. And to cover the inferior grip, this happened a lot less frequently in my life, but there would be moments where that would erupt. Inferior SE grip would mean that I do something impulsive, like physically in the outside world. So it could mean over exercising, which did happen. I did kind of overexert myself in tennis lessons in my mid-teens. And this was coming from a place of anger. And I kind of wanting to resist authority for once. So I would be cycling between submitting to authority, which I felt just really captive, and like not being able to break out of that. But occasionally, like the mind's way of trying to balance things out, there would be these moments of lashing out and resisting authority and getting into trouble for that. So these were like two alternating ways in which the trauma would manifest, and it would be my mind trying to make sense of what was happening, really.
I kind of have my own theories. Like I was diagnosed with avoidant personality disorder, just extreme withdrawal from people in society, and but really still wanting to have relationships. I mean, due to contrary belief, INTJs do need relationships. They just need them at a less extent compared to other types, I think.
Yeah.
But we are human and we do need socialization.
Yeah.
I think it's just really getting deep, either like in your shadow. Or I'm even starting to think like all the functions are kind of like on a spectrum. Like, you know, your FI can be very bad or your FI can be very good. And you kind of probably need to be somewhere in the middle, maybe. Probably like a healthier thing. And I think just me just being so deep into that, I just cut everybody out of my life and just, you know, I was just really, really introverted and still am. I'm still, the battle hasn't been won yet, but you know, I'm getting there. So definitely building on those own theories. So it's always interesting to hear other perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah. When you say that the functions are on a spectrum, that would be kind of like, if you translate that into what the outside world may see, every flavor of INTJ, or every INTJ would have a different flavor because of respective life histories, where we've come from, whatever culture we've grown up in, all molding us at a time.
Yeah, there's 16 personality types, but there's like over 7.5 billion personalities, you know, like well, it's not a cookie cutter thing. We're all individuals. We have our own past experiences, traumas, interests. So we all greatly vary. So it's not like, you know, don't put people in a nice paper sack and just say like, okay, this is your label.
Yeah, so I guess I would ultimately view the typology system as a guide, pretty good guide in some cases, just to like give you a rough blueprint of how people operate, what makes them tick. But it's not gonna look and be the exact same way for each INTJ or each ESFP and such.
Yeah, I like to look at it like the skeletal system of our own personalities, kind of like the framework. How do you use typology and stuff in your practice? Do you kind of like type people in your head? Do you ever talk to people about like this might be your type and this could be something specific, like specifically useful for an INSTP or ESFJ or whoever you're counseling?
Yeah, like I wouldn't offer the MBTI test to all clients. It's more so if their case or their root issue would be well addressed by letting them be more self-aware, knowing their MBTI type. But with every single client, in my own head, I am trying to work out what type this person may be, try and guide myself throughout the process.
I think like typology and using a system with our TEs a good way to navigate people, since we don't have FE and we can't really pick up on feelings of other people. It's very difficult to interact.
Yeah, we're FE blind, so we need some way to compensate with that.
Yeah. what is like a very prevalent type you counsel? I mean, I imagine it's probably the most common types, but do you ever come across any INTJs or INFJs or any less common types?
Um, there are NI dominant clients, which I'm pretty sure are NI dominant, but they are the ones that I did not give the test to. Um, I would think that the most common type of client I have is a high FE user.
Mhm.
So you could have an ENFJ in the room, uh, ISFJ, let's say. Yeah. I think because they come in struggling with perhaps wrestling with the approval of others. Like, do they really need that? Do they not need that? And they're having this debate in their head. So I try to guide them through that and get them towards more clarity. I guess also because they're not strong TE. That's in a sense where my TE can come in and offer a different perspective and a new voice.
Yeah, I think the real high FI users have a problem of setting boundaries and they're easily walked upon. So it's, I think therapy, therapy would be beneficial to anybody. I think therapy is a great thing. And if anybody's listening and they need help, don't be afraid to go seek the help, no matter where you're
Mhm.
at. If it's available, get the help. It's just a human thing. And think if like behavioral health and therapy was around thousands of years ago, we would be much further advanced in society. And I think it's probably one of the most important things that we could do to look forward into the future.
Very true. Yeah, with the advent of social media and other new stresses that were not previously around in the last century, there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I think the internet, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. There's a lot of good to it, and there's a lot of bad. There's a lot of
Yep.
enlightenment of information. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of, it's definitely
Yeah.
a very odd phenomenon. I remember, I'm old enough to remember, I guess I'm lumped into the millennial age, but I'm kind of more
Mhm.
like Gen X millennial, kind of on that cusp, I guess.
All right.
I
Yes.
remember life before the internet. When did the internet start
Yeah.
getting big in Malaysia?
Blowing up pretty much. Instagram is huge here. And it's just what is within us that platforms like Instagram are drawing out the need to compare and just
Yeah.
perpetuating that. The level of which it can be perpetuated to is concerning.
Yeah, I used to use social media a lot, but over the last 4 or 5 years, I haven't. But I've been trying again just to kind of get the word out of my projects and stuff like that. Something I struggle with.
Yeah.
Just so much ugliness and stuff out there, and just so negativity. That's why I really particularly don't like Facebook too much. I mean, Instagram's not too bad, but it's just like
Mhm.
narcissistic pictures of selfies, like this. I'm eating breakfast. I'm at the gym. I'm driving to work. It's just like,
Yeah. What I've acquired. And I got married to this person. Look at how great this person is.
yeah,
Stuff like that.
oh, here's my new boat that I use once every 2 years or something like that.
Yes.
Kind of
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
silly pissing contest if you, I don't use that analogy there, analogy.
Mm. Yeah. I'm on board with that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool that like it, I know like MBTI, I mean, I'm not an MBTI fan. I think it gives Jungian analytical psychology a bad name. And to be honest, I think there's a lot
Mm.
more in-depth look at to it. And it's accepted there in behavioral health there because kind of frowned upon here. I was talking to a therapist that I was talking that I know, and not like my therapist, but someone, an ex coworker, and she said in
Okay.
grad school they like did the MBTI test and they pretty much just poked holes in it one whole day in grad school, and that's pretty much all it was discussed there. Is it pretty prevalent
Mm.
practice there?
Okay. So that's as far as they would take it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's like for entertainment, really, or like pop psychology, falling into that category.
I think that's a good term, pop psychology. I never really thought of it that way. I think a
Mm.
lot of it just the inaccuracy of the test. Like I tested MBTI light test. I never took the actual one, but I tested INTJ twice, INFJ and INTP, and I just kind of automatically dismissed it like 7, 8 years ago because
Yeah.
just it was 50% inaccurate. I looked at the like the vague descriptions of okay, INTJ fits the most, and I see qualities of myself with INTP and INFJ, but not enough to be that.
Mm.
Then like the therapist, the Malaysian therapist I what brought up, she, asked like, are you an INTJ and stuff like that? Like, yeah. And I just told her about it. And she's like, yeah, you definitely should explore it more. And I kind of did. It was just the same vague crap. Then
Yeah.
I discovered it a little bit later, and I found like C.S. Joseph, he went much more in depth with it. And I read like John Beebe, and I was looking at Linda Barron's and like a lot of his sources, and
Ah,
it's
all
very,
about the cognitive functions, really. They are the building blocks.
yeah,
Instead of it being about the dichotomy between 69% I and, let me do my math correctly, 31% E.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, big five's real big here in like academic psychology and clinical psychology. And I think it's just,
Mhm.
I
In
don't, I'm not a,
research, I find.
it's research, but I'm not a big fan of it. I think research, most especially psychological research, is self-reporting data.
Yeah.
And that's more or less
Yeah.
an MBTI test. It's just getting like, what is your take on this? And it could be just something that they don't want to admit to themselves, or maybe they're hungry and they're not, when they wouldn't answer that after they ate, they would answer something totally different. So studies
Mhm.
are definitely flawed in themselves.
Yeah, because it's not about behaviors, it's what is underlying. It's what's the with icebergs, the surface of the iceberg you see above the water level is a lot less than the how much is underneath for the water surface.
Yeah, for sure. We're getting pretty close to running out of time here. These are some kind of
No
baseline
worries.
questions I like to ask everybody. Do you have a favorite type and a least favorite type?
Favorite type would be ISTP, I think. Because I
Really?
look at, it's probably my SE talking here, but I look at, say, Black Widow or James Bond, and I'm like, why can't I do what they do?
Yeah.
To have the brain power, but also the physical superpowers that they seem to have. In terms of least favorite type, that one's a little tougher because I could say that I've seen both healthy and unhealthy variants of each type
Yeah, for
based on
sure.
the people I've met. Sorry. Yeah, it can really vary.
Okay. So you don't have a definite answer there. That's fine. It is kind of hard to pinpoint, but
Yeah.
and what would you like to understand, or other types to understand more about you or INTJs? What would, like, if everybody knew this, what would make your life easier?
Right. Perhaps that uh, our tertiary FI does make us a lot softer than we may appear. And I'm not sure. In an INTJ like myself, can sometimes feel like the TE and the FI are working at the same intensity. So if they are cooperating well in the same axis, that could mean that not only do I have the ability to organize the stuff around me well in an impersonal manner, but coming in with FI, I could also understand where you are coming from with empathy and like not form judgments of you. So if anyone out there had an experience with an immature INTJ, probably with overdeveloped TE and maybe not enough FI, hopefully such people will grow that FI in time and see the strengths in such a function, as vulnerable as it is.
Yeah, that's something I've been definitely trying to do, get in touch with my emotions and try to be less
Mm,
rational and think more. Like, I can't empathize with people, like this is how I can't pick up on their feeling, but I could sympathize with them. Like, oh, I could put myself in their shoes,
right.
and I could, this is how I would feel if this happened to me. And I think that's something that we have to stop and take our time to do with people, especially, I mean, imagine your situation with being a
Yeah.
therapist.
Yeah. And that like cold reasonable logic, which is the T world, it can work side by side with emotional logic. That may sound very odd coming from me as an FE blind person, but in my line of work and through life experiences, I've been able to see that these can be two forms of logic operating side by side instead of trying to shoehorn one into the other, if you
Hmm.
get what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. The last question I have, what would you like others to understand more, or would you like to understand more about others as an INTJ? What do you think like INTJs could learn about others, really, to kind of help them and help everybody else kind of coexist in this crazy world?
A bit of a tricky question, but more like there's always a way to see where others are coming from. And even that's kind of a note to myself as well. No matter how ludicrous an action that someone has taken to try and achieve something, let's say, there would be some emotional reasoning behind that. And just putting myself in their shoes and seeing how they arrived at that supposedly crazy decision to do that thing, like, would help make sense of things for me. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that's pretty much all that I have. Is there anything else, any questions you have, anything else you'd like the audience to know?
Um, I'm excited to see how this channel of yours, your blog, what direction it goes in, and the people that it might draw to. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see where this is all heading, really, to make MBTI more known and more normalized to discuss.
Yeah, I hope to get like an in-depth look and just really get other people's perspective. I'm just a very curious, open person, and
That's
INTJ
right.
is
The
going to be kind of,
curiosity, yes.
yeah, INTJ is going to be very closed-minded, and I just want to show the world that, we're all not like that way, and we're like that way for a reason because, society kind of shuns us in a way.
Yeah.
Just want to bring more
I guess
understanding in the world.
yeah, I kind of ask you, like, what are some of your favorite INTJ fictional characters? And I'm happy to list mine as well.
Some INTJ fictional characters.
Mhm.
I don't really read a lot of fiction. I don't watch movies. I don't play video games anymore, but I was always a big comic fan, so I always loved Batman. Batman's always a real cool one.
Mm,
And
yeah.
Doctor Doom, even though he's a villain, I love Doctor Doom as well.
The way he operates, I like how he operates. Yes. The villain
Batman,
sense.
like,
Dr. Doom rather. But when we
yeah.
come to Batman and Bruce Wayne, I think in the animated series, Batman the animated series, it could
Mhm.
really showcase his FI side, his vulnerability and his moral compass,
Yeah.
working alongside the TE. I think that's an excellent example.
Yeah, I think that's just a big, like you were saying, like our FI is really downplayed, but it's our the way, the direction that we go and how we operate in the world is just how we feel about things. So it's very important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you see like Doctor Doom, he's very vain. It's weird because like our SC, we could be very vain, and he like burned his face, so he wears the mask, so he's very vain about showing his
Yeah.
face. And his INTJ mastermind strategist, whatever you want to call it, went a whole
Mhm.
totally different direction than Batman. What are some of your other favorites?
Pride and Prejudice, that's Mr. Darcy.
I've never.
Just hilarious. Let's see. People will know who Mr. Darcy is, but being a female version of Mr. Darcy is incredibly odd because he would be the kind of tall, dark, mysterious, handsome guy that ladies are going after. But if I am that guy, but a girl, it's quite interesting, really, to operate the way that he does and be as, let's say, outspoken and blunt as he is. But he's also pretty interesting because he has his moments of vulnerability as well.
Not familiar with Pride and Prejudice. I've never read it. It's a book, right?
Yeah, started as a book, it had some movie and on-screen adaptations in later years.
Oh, I might have to take a look at that.
Yeah.
I always have a problem with fictional typing because the writers and the actors don't always portray one archetype or one type. They kind of, like
Mm,
Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory. I
true.
think he's like a big amalgamation of an INTP and an INTJ. I think he's both really, and it's just not a representation of one type.
Because you have different folks writing him. It's not just him writing him, if you get what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you'd like to discuss before we go?
I think that's all. This has been a great time
Yeah. And it's,
on this channel.
yeah.
Yes.
I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's very interesting to get perspective of people that are overseas, especially other INTJs that are overseas, kind of see how the world is in
Mm,
their eyes.
yeah. And wrestling with like different cultural backgrounds as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that does it for us today. If you like what we talked about, please like, share, subscribe, share the news of our podcast. And I'm planning on doing more YouTube videos and everything like that. So keep an eye out for that so you don't miss anything. You can also join our Discord server too. We could definitely have some good discussions there. So we definitely want to help that grow and make it a big community where we can all get to know each other and, pass the word on and kind of give everybody else's perspective. Well, thank you for going beyond the clickbait and have a good day.